Hello again. Welcome to another edition of Arts and Ideas. I'm Sue Swinand, and I'm delighted to be over at the Worcester Art Museum today in an exhibition of the works of Ron Rosenstock, who is an internationally known photographer. And the show that's here now is called Hymn to the Earth, and it's more or less a mini retrospective of Ron's work. It opened on December 15th, and it will be here through March 18th. And Ron, we're so happy to be able to share your work with the audience today.
Thank you.
The work is beautiful. It's very sublime and very spiritual. So do try to come over and see it. And so would you consider this a retrospective of your work, or?
Not a complete retrospective. The show was curated by David Acton, who was absolutely wonderful to work with from beginning to end, and it still goes on. David came to my studio and looked through stacks of prints, stacks and stacks, and he chose work not from the perspective of being so much of a retrospective of work that he related to, that he felt was unique and important, and people should see it.
So there are samplings of work from the last 40 years, but not a complete representation of all the various series you've done.
Yes, yes.
Ron has traveled the world over. He really is a world traveler, leading workshops, photography
Well,
workshops.
we used to call them workshops.
Okay.
Now, workshops are very specific to a certain kind of workshop, like say nude in landscape, or a certain kind of technical kind of thing, of working with a certain kind of camera or whatever. We now call them photo tours, which opens it up to anyone who wants to do a lot of photography, the kind of photography they enjoy doing. I don't dictate what people should photograph. I just take them to great places to photograph and answer any questions that they may have about their cameras.
And they can learn from each other as well.
They learn from each other, sure. And I do a lot of teaching in the evenings as well. I bring my computer and projector, so I do slideshows, and I've even taken to bringing a little Dexter mat cutter and showing folks how to finish their prints off nicely. And I've gotten very good at what's called Silver Effects Pro, which is a Nik software. It's kind of like Photoshop, only it's really geared. It's almost like darkroom work for a computer.
Yeah.
It has just what you need.
I wanted to ask you about that because you started off using the 8x10.
Oh, yes.
So.
Yes. Oh, gosh, yes.
When did that go by the wayside?
Well, okay, I kind of started with 8x10. Most people start with a little camera and work their way up. I did the opposite. I worked with a great big camera and worked my way down. But I was most impressed by the work of Edward Weston, and this goes back to my high school days, in the late 50s. And I saw a show of his at the Museum of Modern Art in New York City. And in fact, I have this conscious moment when I saw a photograph of his of a cabbage leaf. I saw it on the wall, and I came on it, and I swear I saw it breathe. It was just one of those, it just called to me. There was just something magical about it. And I became very interested in Weston and the way he worked, and he just made contact prints from an 8x10 negative. And a contact print basically is on a countertop. You'd put the piece of paper, the light-sensitive paper, the negative on top of that, and a piece of glass on top of that, and shine a light through it.
1-to-1.
Yeah, exactly. So it was exactly the same size as the negative. Now I did that for about 20 years. I was really influenced by his work, so I did the same kind of technique until I got an 8x10 enlarger, actually through the museum when they didn't have any use for it. And I got that enlarger probably in the mid-70s sometime. But before that, I was only doing 8x10 contacts.
And of course, the digital, now you're doing digital
primarily.
Primarily, or are you still using film as well?
No, I'm not using film at all.
Okay.
Yeah, we could probably talk for a few hours about the transition, but I could try and sum it up. After working with the large format for many, many years, as I got older, the camera got heavier. I don't know how that happened. Some kind of mysterious thing was going on. So I went down to 4x5, which is still considered large format, but it's much easier to deal with. And over time, I guess this started 10, 15 years ago, people started going on my photo tours and they were bringing digital cameras. Now, I'm the expert. I'm supposed to know everything there is to know about photography. People pay money to travel with me.
Digital is a whole nother ball of wax.
Exactly. It was so new, and I think I better find out about this. Now, it took a while, and it took a few years, you know, until I really became comfortable with digital. It took a few more years until I really found my vision again, because it's a different tool to work with. You know, the product is the same, but you have to go around the bar in a very different way.
But all in all, you find that it offers you more flexibility and potential and expressive.
It does now. It
Yes.
does now. When I first started, it didn't.
Yes.
It didn't. In fact, for the longest time, I would always bring my large format camera on a photo tour and a digital camera. You know, because I didn't have the confidence in the digital camera, and I didn't think I'd really go in that direction.
Now, are you printing your own images at this point? Or?
No. I stopped shooting film, although most of this show is made from film, but there are about 5 images that are purely digital in this show. And if I didn't point them out, you couldn't even tell, of course.
Yeah.
There's no way of knowing.
And
but,
a fact is, a large photograph like this, too, to develop with film in
exactly.
a bath of this size would be really cumbersome.
So let me answer that first question about printing my own, which is important. Most professionals, whether you work for National Geographic or any of the nature magazines, or you're doing just a lot of digital work, would work with a highly trained and an excellent printer. And I work with a man right here in Worcester, one of the best in the world, one of the best kept secrets too. His name is Mark Doyle at Autumn Color Digital Imaging. And
I think we're going to do a show on him.
You really should.
Yeah.
You know,
he's outstanding.
He used to do the dye transfer work for like Elliott Porter and Ernst Haas. He's done work for NASA.
Is magnificent.
He's done a lot of museum work for museums all over the country. Now, to make a print 30 inches wide, he scanned my 8x10 negative to make this print, and from a high-res scan, you know, made a print 30 inches wide. I could never have done that in the darkroom, and the quality is superb. I mean, it's just as good as
going
silver.
going back to the idea that he's right in Worcester, I did want to mention that although Ron is a world traveler and leads all these tours around the world, he is also our local pride because he lives right here in Holden, and he's been involved in the Worcester area, as you've been getting a sense of, for many, many years. And what got you started in nature photography?
Well, as I mentioned, you know, Weston's work really moved me, and some of Weston's sand dunes particularly moved me. I could have a whole show of just dunes now, because I loved his dunes. And I'd never had the opportunity until recently. I also work in Death Valley, so I shoot the dunes in Death Valley and in Morocco as well.
And of course, it's all these marvelous abstract shapes that speak to you in a very absolute kind of way, without any narrative. I never see any figures in your compositions. It's always these very formal, elegant forms of nature.
Well,
are there ever figures?
There is a photograph in the hall here of Bodhanath, which is a Buddhist stupa in Kathmandu. And there's a little monk kind of walking through the bottom of it. So, but no, I actually could have a whole show of people also.
Really?
Yeah, I do a lot of portraiture in Peru and also in Morocco.
Well, you know, it's interesting though, when you put people in pictures and props, and even there aren't even man-made things in most of your pictures that are in this show.
That's true.
It's really about elements of nature that are timeless and eternal.
Yes.
And I love that quality of your work, where it's always going to be that way. You know, it just exists eternally as this.
Yeah. In fact, I'm glad you said that, because it reminded me of something that I've said to my students when I was at Clark about different photographers describe their work in different way, or the moment of making the exposure. Like Cartier-Bresson talks about the decisive moment. Edward Weston called, had a phrase, the flame of recognition,
Ooh,
which is kind of neat.
Ooh, like
That
an
lovely-
awakening.
Yes.
Like it speaks to you.
And,
Oh,
I,
I
and
love
I've
that.
used
Flame of recognition.
flame of recognition. And for myself, I've used the expression, the eternal moment.
Wow, I like that. I like that a lot. So there really are different things which drive artists, and getting at something which is sublime, meaning that which is grand and sort of overwhelms us with its awesome qualities. It's really something worth experiencing. I want to hear more about that maybe when we look at the photographs.
Yeah.
So you were just a few more questions about your influences. I know you said you were speaking with Ansel Adams and studied with Minor White at MIT.
Yeah, yeah.
So these were some of your early influences.
Yes, and Paul Caponegro as well.
Paul Caponegro.
Yes. Yeah.
And how was it you went to Ireland? This show has a lot of the images of Ireland.
Yeah, a lot from Ireland, and in fact, one of my books is called The Light of Ireland. The first book that I published is just images from Ireland. That's pretty much all my large 8x10 negatives that made that book also. But I got excited about Ireland in the early 70s, late 60s, around that point when I met Paul Caponegro, because he had recently returned from photographing in Ireland for over a year. He had a National Endowment for the Arts grant and worked there for over a year and brought back just the most wonderful photographs. And in fact, they were so wonderful that John Sarkowski, who at the time was the curator of MoMA in New York City, gave Paul his first big one-man show. And I saw that show, and it just blew me away. And I kind of fell in love with Ireland, just the wonderful open spaces and that kind of, as we mentioned, that eternal feeling of it's been this way for eternity. And there's so much of Ireland that is just wide open, and I love photographing the ocean.
I also love the
ocean
thing
has a lot
about
to do with it.
Ireland that it's not new and improved. When I first
Ireland's
went to
changed
Ireland,
quite a bit.
I know, but there are still many places
Yeah.
where you just love the fact that it's not new and improved.
Yeah, the west of Ireland has,
You know what?
has remained pure.
Let's look at some of the images.
Sure.
Now, this is a picture of Ireland, is it not?
Yes, yes. It was one of those days where the sun is in and out, and I photograph in all kinds of light. It doesn't matter to me, way back, George Eastman said the sun had to be over your left shoulder to take a photograph. Not so. I photograph, sometimes it's pitch black. I photograph like there's photographs in the show of Venice at night, at St. Mark's, just with street lights. This was a diffused kind of lighting. The sun was behind the clouds. These are mussel shells. It was low tide. And I saw this sort of geometric shapes here, and I positioned myself just, where I have one triangle in back of the other, and the sun is there, so it's just sort of illuminating all these wonderful shapes.
What always impresses me about your work is the design. You really have a sense for composition and design.
I try very hard to have all the pieces just fit until it feels comfortable. It's a very kind of right brain kind of thing. You have to sort of turn off the left brain that is sort of orchestrating and telling you what to do all the time, and sort of listen to your heart and kind of to commune with what's out there, to kind of feel the spirit of the place. I mean, this really is my sort of driving force, in photography.
Well, it comes through. When you look at the photographs, I really am able to share a little bit of what you experienced on that location. And at that moment, you were talking about these special moments and,
yes.
and some of the things you tell your students.
Yes. Well, there's one special quote that I always mention at all of my photo tours and every time I give a talk to an audience. It's a special quote by the very famous artist Pablo Picasso. And Picasso said that art washes away from the soul the dust of everyday life. Now think about that. Art washes away from the soul the dust of everyday life. What do those words mean? If I asked everybody watching this show to give me a definition of art, you'd all give me, a different definition, or soul, for that matter. We don't really know. Philosophers discuss this. What is art? What is soul? I just want to share with you for a minute my personal definitions of art and soul, because it's really the reason why I photograph. To give you the definition of art, well, it's not that easy. In some cultures, like in Bali, which everything is artistic, in the Balinese language, they don't even have a word for art because it's everything. How do you define everything? For me, it's basically striving to reach my highest potential, and the art is actually the result of that attempt to commune with my highest potential.
It's giving it physical form.
It's giving it physical form. I mean, there's so many artists, even musicians. Like there's a famous story about Pablo Casals. Pablo Casals, as you all know, was a very famous cellist. And when he was 70, he was interviewed, and he said he had learned so much about music, if he died tomorrow, he'd die a happy man. When he was 80, he was interviewed again, and he said, if someone had told me when I was 70 how much more there was to learn between age 70 and 80, I never would have believed them. When he was 90, he was interviewed again, and he said, it's been the greatest 10 years of my life in terms of learning and appreciating, and just the subtleties of my music is just
so when
been
you look
fabulous.
at Picasso's statement, what it is that it's having that dust swept from our eyes and having a direct experience of this sublime, and you can imagine that the more intense that experience becomes, the more we see and the more we're able to get into the photograph, really.
Sure.
Now, this is a piece that is from the Czech Republic,
Yes,
did you
yeah.
say?
Yes, it's from the Czech Republic. We talked before about me starting in Ireland, and a lot of people associate me with Ireland, but because of how life takes you in different directions, I now lead photo tours in many, many different countries, including the Czech Republic. And this is actually a fairly recent image. It's an infrared image, which I could do a whole program on talking. If I do a program that I present to camera clubs on infrared photography, explaining about the difference. I mean, you see the sky that would normally
Almost
be blue
black.
is black, and leaves come out white.
Why is that?
This is because the camera is converted to accept only infrared light, which is below the visible spectrum. Our eyes do not see infrared. Bumblebees see infrared, and that's why they can zoom in on a flower. Like we don't see X-rays, but we know they're there. We don't see microwaves, but we see the result of microwaves. Infrared also responds to heat, and like the leaves give off more heat, so they become lighter.
Well, that kind of gives you the feeling of the mysticism of these, because that sap is rolling in those leaves
and giving off energy.
The juice is
yes.
giving off its life into
it's another way of seeing things. So I'm very excited about it. I do a lot of infrared now. I have to tell you, I mean, this is an interesting story. Some of you may or may not know that Minor White shot infrared film back in the 50s and 60s. In fact, infrared was first invented in photography about 1934. There was a Leica camera, actually, that first came out. A lot of people don't know about infrared, but now, digitally, it's so easy to get a camera converted to do, to be a dedicated infrared camera.
What's your favorite place that you ever photographed? Like, what was the most inspiring or the most uplifting? Something that just stands out.
Now, I hate to disappoint you, Sue.
Where
I am is the most exciting place at the moment. Always.
Yeah. Isn't that
always.
great?
Where I am, I'm present to that.
I always love the quote that Walt Whitman said, "I open my mouth where I happen to be standing." It's like, it's all magic. It's all wonderful.
It is.
It's all
And you go with the flow.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
I was very fortunate, and I'd like to just mention something, if I may. If anyone were interested in these photo tours that I do all over the world, it's very easy to go online. The website is, once I say it, you'll probably never forget it, because it's just phototc.com. That's www.phototc.com. That means the Photo Tour Collection.com. So check it out, see what I do. Also, you know, this is just a fraction of my work. On my website, I have lots more work, which is just my name.
Website. Just
which
look
is
up
just my
Ron
name.
Rosenstock.
Yeah, ronrosenstock.com. So it's
And
also
you can
very
see
easy.
many of his diverse series that, you know, we can hardly show the tip of the iceberg.
Yes, and I
here.
also, because of digital, I started shooting color. And I did a number of years, I just worked in color. I mean, as the teacher.
How do you feel about color versus black and white?
Well, I explored color, and I did a lot of work in color, and I still shoot some color. Like in January, when I'm photographing in Iceland, doing the Aurora Borealis, I'm not going to do that in black and white. I mean,
There
certain
you go.
things cry out
Sure.
for color. I have a whole series of beautiful rainbow photographs from Iceland, because around every corner there's another waterfall and rainbow. Again, it's like going into some mystical land, some kind of hobbit land, you know, in Iceland.
The land that time forgot.
The land that time forgot, exactly.
Wow.
You could see why Jules Verne kind of got excited about that.
The timeless. You know, I was wondering, does landscape that involves architecture or some sign of the human presence, like something man-made, is that less appealing for you? Is that less timeless?
So it's all appealing to me. I could have a show just on architecture. I've been photographing for almost 50 years.
Okay.
In fact, the only commercial photography I did, the only commercial photography that I was successful at, I've tried a few, but I was an architectural photographer. My primary company that I worked for was called the Architects Collaborative. This was founded by Walter Gropius, and this is in Cambridge, and this was back in the 60s. In fact, I photographed Little Center at Clark when it was first built, and then I started teaching there 20 years later.
So you can find that experience, that transcendental moment in any subject.
Oh, yes.
But primarily you're working with these timeless nature subjects.
That is the main thing,
Yeah.
yes. Yeah, nature perhaps is number one, but I do a lot of work also with ancient monuments, whether it's stones or ancient abbeys. You know, in Bhutan, those wonderful ancient Buddhist, they call them dzongs, we call them monasteries. They're all over the place, and each one is magnificent.
You've done New Zealand and all.
Well, New Zealand is great for landscape.
Yeah.
You know, the people are just like
and
us.
monumental forms and
Yes.
mountain ranges.
Oh yeah, Milford Sound.
I really wanted to show the audience some of your books. You actually have 4 books out,
Yes,
don't you?
yes, yes.
And this one is Hymn to the Earth, and is primarily Ireland.
No, this particular book has work from all of my destinations. And it also has wonderful poetry that was written specifically for each image in the book by a very good friend of mine whose name is Gabriel. Believe it or not, his last name is Rosenstock.
I couldn't believe that when I read that in the cover of the book.
Well, Gabriel is actually a very well-known Irish poet. He lives in Dublin. He was born in Ireland, and he's also one of the foremost authorities on the Irish language. He's published over 30 books just in the Irish language, but a lot of his poetry is in English as well. This particular book was the, I guess, you know, what really motivated the museum to have a show with the same title of Hymn to the Earth. And the cover is a photograph from Milford Sound in New Zealand, excuse me.
Ah.
So I have work from Morocco and from Ireland and from Italy and from India and Nepal and from
So this book is quite diverse in the images, and then your other books are?
The other books are more specific. I have a book called The Light of Ireland, which is just landscapes from the west of Ireland. I have another book which I love called Chiostro, Photographs of Italy. Chiostro in Italian means cloister. So I use the word as a metaphor, meaning sort of a place of meditation. It's 90% architecture of the churches and also of the wonderful landscapes in Tuscany.
This is a stunning image of
Muckgrass Abbey.
Extremely spiritual, and I'll just read one of Gabriel's poems, because what astounded me when I was reading through this book yesterday, again after a long time, I realized that the poetry was so specific to the image and so perfectly matched. And when I asked Ron about it, he said he wrote the poems for the images, which really shows in the book. And he writes a lot of haiku, and he says, muttering in Latin on his daily rounds, the Abbey ghost. And you can just feel that as you look at the image. And some of the ones about the stones, or the one with the life in the trees, or this one, on her way to us, the goddess rested here 10,000 years ago.
It was sunlight sort of dancing through a bush, and the wind blew the bush a little bit.
Just a moment.
So it created a glow.
And a vibration of life, and wonderful.
Again, nature kind of pointed the way.
Or this one that says,
this is a lovely one.
yes, it says, it says, with what precision light descends after a long journey.
Right on the flower.
And thinking that the light is coming millions and millions and millions of miles.
From the sun.
You know, just wonderful. So this book is available in the store, is it
yes,
not?
all 4 books are available at the museum gift shop right here at the Worcester Art Museum.
Well, they're just marvelous, and I've enjoyed this so much. I'm going to really share it with some of my friends as well.
Thank you.
And it's been a wonderful experience talking to you, and I hope you'll all come and see the show, which is here till March 18th.
Thank you so much.
And don't forget to look at Ron's website, and thanks a million for spending your time.
Thank you, my pleasure.
We'll look for you again next time with another edition of Arts and Ideas. See you then.